minorities. If you're a member of minority, your parents are probably a member of that minority. You have a support system. You know what it's like to be, fill in the blank. And you know about the discrimination, and you know the answers to discrimination, and your own sense of pride. As a person, a newly minted person who's blind in my case, I didn't know any of that. So what an odd way to become a minority with no parents, no role models, no anything. Who are we as blind people? And when I say blind, I mean both fully blind and also the spectrum of low vision that extends. And there are a lot more of people with low vision than full blindness. But I didn't have any of those role models. So the question is, what do you do? And I'll tell you what I did. It's the same thing that any teenager would do and any young person would do, which is deny, evade, hide. And I did that. I pretended like I saw stuff that I didn't. I was very clever about not getting myself into situations where I would be outed as a blind person. But it was also, as I got further into my 20s, I found that I was self-limiting a bit. Like I'd go to something, but I'd think, how was I going to get back when it got dark and I really couldn't see in the dark? And I had no other training or all the techniques that effective blind people knew. I didn't know. So I would start to absent myself for things that I really should have been going to. But even at Berkeley, I met a few blind people that started making an impression on me that eventually would be revolutionary. There was a place in the undergraduate library there, we called it the Cave. And that's where you would meet your reader. It's less used now than it was then. But the disability offices at Berkeley, you would be able to match people with disabilities and readers. You go to this place, you have little offices, and that's where you might either read directly some of your coursework, or maybe your reader would record something and then hand you, well, then it was a cassette. So I started noticing there were some blind people there. And at the end of the term, I met this guy named Dennis, and I said, what are you doing for the summer? And he said, he's a blind guy. He said, I'm going to Europe. And I said, really? With whom? Figuring there had to be a caretaker. And he said, by myself. And that just sort of was a mind bender. How does a fully blind person do this? I said, why are you going to Europe? I'm going to Holland because I hear that's where you could get really good hashish, and it'd be really fun socially.
Wow, that's a motivator.
But the key thing was, here was this guy, he had long blonde hair. He was an actualized blind person going where he wanted and doing what he wanted to do. And I had no idea that was possible. And so the story of acquired disability is the story of how do you find those people so that you can start thinking about your own life, not as limiting because the bus is going to come back when it's dark, but just going where you want to go and becoming, we say now, actualized as a person. So those were some early stories.
Wow, Bryan, that's so rich. There's so much there. I think about people with disabilities trying to pass, and I'll just share for myself. I've got a visual impairment. I have partial vision in my right eye and have in my life become legally blind due to eye disease, and then have recovered some of that vision and a lot of it. And the passing, as like you can see, is really stressful. And I remember for myself trying to get on public transportation because I couldn't drive anymore, and beginning to really look at my life in a different way, right? And so I totally get that. And I want to touch a little bit about kind of the role models and mentorship and finding community, right? Because it sounds like this person, Dennis, that you met, showed you that it's possible for you to do things that you want to do and to not see being blind as a limitation for you. So can you tell me a little bit, did you have any mentors while you were in college, or is it?
Yeah. Not that many. That came later. By the
Oh,
way, Dennis was studying chemistry as a blind person, got his PhD at Berkeley, and then did a whole career at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo as a chemistry professor. So these were the people that we needed to know. I needed to know, and there were a few others, but there was this guy who worked at Lawrence Hall of Science, the Science Museum at Berkeley. He was fully blind, and he worked designing the science curricula, and he was into amateur radio, and so he was always bristling with the technology of the day and doing outlandish things with it. But I thought I could pass during that time, and I did the best I could. But I think it was an inauthentic way of being, and I think it's natural for a kid to feel that way. um, there were a couple of words you just said, Dr. Varela, I want to underscore. You said passing. So we're borrowing that from, of course, like light-skinned people of color who might deny their own heritage in an effort to be part of the dominant culture. Yeah, that's just what happens with people with low vision. And it is selling yourself short, and it is being inauthentic.
mhm.
So that's one thing that happens in disability too. And then the other side of it is borrowing from gay culture. We're talking about being in the closet as a blind person.
Mhm.
And then coming out of the closet as a blind person means, yes, use that white cane, that thing that nobody wants at the beginning, but is so important to your autonomy and actual active travel. I
Mhm.
thought when I first got a white cane, I thought this is this horrible label as a blind person. Who would ever take me seriously? Who would ever date me? Who would do all this stuff? I didn't understand that this was a gateway to self-confidence, because the white cane for me was a tool of liberation. It said I didn't have to wait, get home while the sun was still shining, because I could just barely see then and avoid the night. So
Mhm.
that's a whole long story, but I was passing, or thought I was passing, for a long time. And my visual situations are pretty typical of a lot of people with disabilities. You have a little bit when you're younger, and then you acquire more as you get older. By the time I was in my 30s, I really didn't have much vision to work with at all.
Mhm. Mhm.
So it was then that I thought, okay, how am I going to? I know that I was working journalist then. I knew there were blind writers, journalists, professionals of all kinds. I just didn't know them. I didn't know how they worked in their workplace. So I made it my mission to find these folks. And I started really, you know, I started reading the Braille Monitor, which is the monthly magazine of the National Federation of the Blind. I couldn't even say the B word, the blindness word at the time.
Mhm.
That was for me stigma. And that's because I did not know effective, amazing, cool blind people. I
Mhm.
wanted to find them.
Mhm.
So I read like 2 years of the Braille Monitor in one long weekend. And I thought, wow, there's this woman, she's an archaeologist as a blind person. There's another person, he's a history professor, and all and on this kind of thing. So I just, sometimes their emails were in the article, sometimes I found them and I just rang them up and started talking. People were amazingly open to talking about their lives and their challenges. And for me, that was a real pivot,
Mhm.
because first I found like, oh, these people are living lives, earning money, supporting a family, all these things that I had big questions about.
Mhm.
And the second part was they all said, you better get some training. You can't just sort of guess and by golly it.
Yeah.
So at the time, I didn't know a dot of Braille. I didn't know anything about how to use a computer that talked. I would never be seen with a white cane. And so I did this thing. I took 6 months out and went into a boot camp for blind folks and did nothing but blindness disability training for 6 months.
Wow. Mhm.
And everybody who goes to these things says, I can't do this. Who has 6 months spare just sitting around in your life? But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because when I came out of that 6 months, I could write all day long using synthetic speech and not have back strain from lead and neck strain from leaning in to be inches away from a giant monitor. I could go anywhere I wanted. I could read and manipulate information. But more than the skills, yeah, skills are important. There were tons of skills. More than the skills was a sense of confidence, a sense that there are blind people doing everything out there. If there's a problem, there's a toolkit, there's mentorship, there's a sense that we'll do it together. And so from the time I finished that boot camp, I was more productive as a journalist than I ever had been, was more involved with my professional community of science journalists. And it was, for me, a huge, huge turning point. So,
Wow, Brian, that's incredible.
yeah.
That's incredible. So I think this is a perfect segue to the next question. So I know you talked about employment, right? About after college, kind of finding people, professionals who were also blind or visually impaired, and how important that is. And I think that employment, people with disabilities always have questions about employment, right? It's a scary thing when there's disclosure, right? There's issues around disclosure. Do I disclose? Do I not disclose? We know that there is discrimination in employment despite it being illegal, right? We know that places of employment tend to be very ableist and don't design the workplace for people with disabilities in mind. So kind of with that in mind, can you talk a little bit about the history of disability, and can you tell us about how things have changed or improved for people with disabilities in the workplace?
Oh, those are such important topics, Dr. Varela. I started working just at the beginning of all this important legislation that gives us rights. And when my first job out of journalism school was a job at the CBS affiliate in San Francisco, KPIX, where I was an assistant assignment editor. And okay, I was whatever, 22, 23. I was still trying to pass, as we were talking about. So I went in there, I used the CCTV, that is a closed circuit TV magnifier. I had a little one. So, but at first I came in and I worked there for a couple of years. It was a great experience. I got to know the folks. And at the holiday party that first year, here was the executive producer. And he said, Brian, when you first came in that first day, I thought, that guy has a lot of guts. And I'm thinking, okay, here's the disability trope and the inspiration and all that. What he said was, to come in as you were, so drunk from the night before. I thought, wow, that guy really has a lot. Well, he had thought that my strange looking eyes and the inability to focus on a gaze was that I was recovering from a bender the night before. So those of us who think that we were passing, that's what he really thought that first day. In the old days, you had to do stuff with humor, and sometimes your disability can and will be a way to bond with somebody if you do it right. So my second job after college was I wanted to work up on the vocational goal and go from assistant assignment editor to executive producer. And the way you do that in television is you go to a smaller market and get a better job. So that's what brought me to Sacramento. It's an important thing for people with disabilities. You have to have the skills to go to the new markets to do the career advancement like anybody else. So I went to KXTV in Sacramento for my job interview. Okay, so I was a little more open about my disability. I had that closed circuit TV monitor. I was working in TV, and some people were skeptical, like, how can a person with a visual impairment work in television? And I found myself in the news director's office for this important interview, and I talked to him about my disability. And then the news director said, well, I want to tell you, he closed the door. He said, I also have a neurological disability. And I said, yeah, a lot of news directors have one. And he just busted up laughing. He had epilepsy, and
Oh,
he was in the closet about it. And so when he had that aura that he was going to have a seizure, he would just close the door, have his seizure, and then open it later on.
wow.
This was literally in the closet about it. So we bonded over that. And the laughter about news directors with neurological disability, really, that won me the job. That was an amazing thing.
Wow. And so you went in there to look for a job, and then you, even just like you having the courage to go in there, do it, talk about your disability, made somebody else, right, feel like they could own who they were, right?
Yeah, what I tell folks is you have to put it on the table. You know,
Mhm.
all those great laws that prevent discrimination, that doesn't get you the job. All those, you know, the dynamic, I've hired hundreds of people since then. The dynamic is, do I like this person? Are they being straight with me emotionally and otherwise? Can I trust them and all of that?
Mhm.
So although any person with a disability has zero legal requirement that they discuss their disability,
Mhm.
I'm telling you that if you want to win that job, you've got to bring it up yourself in the job interview,
Mhm.
and you've got to be able to say something about it that's convincing and positive. Like, you know, you may be wondering how I can work in television as a person who has low vision. Well, let me show you a thing, how I do this or that, or let me tell you how I did it in the past, or whatever it is. And so many times in these employment programs, I'll talk to somebody who had an interview, and I'd say, how'd the job interview go? And she'll say, oh, it went great. And really? Did you talk about blindness? No, it never came up. It was great. Did you get the job? No. You
No.
know?
Mhm.
So one of the things is uh, it is unfair and unjust that people with disabilities have to do the work of bringing up the subject and negotiating it with others. Imagine if you're a racial or ethnic minority and you have to say, well, as a Latinx, I have to do this or that. That would just be absurd. But as
Mhm.
people with disabilities, it's still an acceptable level of conversation
Mhm.
that we have to, and if you want the job, you've got to address it with a frank discussion of who you are. And what employers are really looking for is, for any employee, are you comfortable in your own skin? Are you
Mhm.
going to fit in the office? Do I like you?
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
are you really, really, have other issues that are going to be a problem in the workforce? That's the real hiring agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's, Brian, I'm going to say, I think it's really tricky for many folks. I think folks with hidden disabilities who can go through an interview and not feel the need to have to address it, right? Because it's not evident when you meet somebody or in the interview. But I think, like what you were saying, the repercussions are real,
Yeah.
because I've known folks who have not disclosed at the interview stage, said they don't need accommodations, right? And then 2 months into the job, they realize that they can't do it anymore, right?
Yeah.
That they're having trouble, that they're not able to do their job, they're not showing up to work, things are happening. And then they disclose. And by that point, they're still on probation. The employer begins to feel like they weren't honest during the interview and
Mhm.
application stage, right? In the application, you don't have to disclose, but they feel like in that first part of employment, right, which is just trying to get your foot in the door to get an interview, and at the interview that they were not they were not honest. And I think that that has real repercussions for folks.
Mhm.
But I also don't want to minimize that there are biases and stigmas and stereotypes and misconceptions about people with disabilities. And I think specifically when I think about people with mental health disabilities or learning disabilities, right? And I think you make a good point about educating that employer, potential employer, about your disability. Because if we don't do that work to educate the folks in front of us, then we leave it to them to then make up stories about our ability, right? What we can and can't do. And I think that that's where it becomes dangerous, and that just perpetuates stereotypes even more.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
mhm. So I appreciate your insight on that, Bryan. I want to just quickly, I want to just show up, since we're talking about employment. I pulled up some statistics this morning, and I'm going to share them with the group around employment, around education and employment. So I'm just
That's fantastic. And then I want to talk to you a bit about disclosure.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, let's do that. Let me pull up my screen here. All right, so let me get rid of this. All right, so I've pulled up a table and a line graph, and the first one is on education and college. So at the beginning of our session, we talked about education, the importance of it. And as you can see here, so this table graph starts from 2008 and goes all the way to 2020. It has the estimates of the population, civilians ages 25 to 34, living in community settings, right, and who are in college. So in 2008, the percentage of people with disabilities in college was at 9.8. Oh, is this, I'm sorry, I'm wondering if no, this is the right. Well, I was like, wow, this is surprising, but let me make sure. Yes, with a bachelor's degree or more. I'm sorry, I missed that, table 4, bachelor's degree or more. And in 2020, it's at 19%, right? So you can see how it slowly over time between 2008 and 2020 has increased just a little bit, right? But in 2008, if you look at people without disabilities, their education rate was at, or percentage was at 31.3%. And in 2020, it's at 41.9%. So the line graph really shows us that there's a line at the top going up that represents people with disabilities. And then there's a line graph at the bottom representing, people with disabilities at the bottom and people without disabilities at the top. And you can just the visual representation and then that gap, right, around education, I think is, to me, really astonishing. And I feel like numbers tell a story. And, I think it's so important that we advocate for and encourage, people with disabilities to go to college or get some kind of skill so that they can move into meaningful employment. I am going to go into my next slide here really quickly. Let me back. Let me see here. Oh, I'm having trouble with my slide. Okay, here's the one on employment. In 2008, it's the same. It's a table graph from 2008 to 2020. And this is from the latest disability compendium that just came out. In 2008, we saw people with disabilities. The employment to population ratio was at 39.1% in 2008. In 2020, for people with disabilities, it's at 38.4, right? So it's even less. And you can see there's variation. 2009, 35.5, 2019, 38.9, and now it's at 38.4. But for people without disabilities in 2008, it was at 77.7%. That's a huge gap from 39.1 of people with disabilities to the 77.7% for people without disabilities. In 2020, we have people without disabilities at 75.8%. and people with disabilities at 38.4%. So as you can see, even though we've had advances in the law, advances in education, there is still a huge gap for people with disabilities in employment. And so Bryan, I know you wanted to share something. I want to talk a little bit more about employment opportunities for people with disabilities, but please share whatever you were going to share.
Yeah. And Dr. Varela, can I just say you just modeled a great practice in describing an infographic or a slide that you share on Zoom meetings so many times. People are left out unless they do just what you did now. So thank you for that.
Yes.
I've been a fan of the history of blindness employment statistics over the years. You know, if you go back and read Newell Perry, who was probably the originator of the disability rights movements here in Berkeley, he graduated UC Berkeley class of 1896. And he started an organization about employment of blind people when nobody who is blind was working. And by the turn of the century, 2% of blind people were working. That was the number, 98%
Mm.
unemployed, 2% employed. When you
Wow.
graduated the School for the Blind, you were expected to go into somebody else's custody in 1900 and just live as a ward or as a dependent. So those numbers have gradually climbed, and today the number is that 43% of blind people of working age are employed, 57% unemployed. So think about that. 57% unemployment, that's more than 10 times the rate of today's unemployment for people without disabilities. So we've got room to grow. Interestingly enough, the stats from the California Department of Rehabilitation tell us that if you do find a job as a blind person, of all disabilities, blind people earn the highest amount per hour, and fully blind people actually have a higher income than people who have low vision, not the other way around. So the more significant the disability, the higher the wages. Why is that? Maybe it is because if you're fully blind, you've really got to learn something, and you can't exist in the shadows and try to pass for a longer time. And so that's where you find the blind lawyers or the blind administrators and the blind folks who got serious earlier on in their career, and it starts showing vocationally. So
That's a great point. That's a great point. Wow, 2%, 2%.
yeah.
And really, when you talk about folks going into the custody of another person, or not even at that time, right? Not having that autonomy, right? And that agency over their own lives. And now, people have autonomy and agency, but there's systems and barriers within those systems that prevent people with disabilities from being able to participate in employment at the same rate as people without disabilities. So Bryan, that just leads me to, you have done some amazing work in your career, and I want you to tell us a little bit about the work that you've done to break down barriers and create opportunities for employment for people with disabilities.
Thank you. Well, I did my first half of career as a journalist in writing about science, and that was really fun. But it was really like any part of journalism. You write a story, a million people read it, but you don't meet any of them. And I'm a people person, and I like the close contact. And I grieve these 2 years we've spent in the pandemic, and I'm so glad that we're coming out of it. But I really believe that wherever in our field, in blindness, wherever you fall, you need this period of time when you are close with others and get this sense of optimism, self-confidence, and self-respect, because you're with people who also have aspirations for themselves. And so I wanted to create that programmatically in a couple of places. I did work. I was the executive director of the Society for the Blind in Sacramento. And for me, that was kind of a laboratory, an early laboratory in designing programs and seeing how things stick and how people really learn. And, we're having a conversation. That's a way that people learn. People don't learn so much by jamming into a classroom and sitting passively and being lectured at for hour after hour. So when I got to the Lighthouse, I realized that it's the informal education that often is the stickiest. So this is why we have a big camp at Napa, so people can spend some unstructured time together.
Mhm.
But in San Francisco, in the employment context, I wanted to do programs that were immersive. In fact, so we called this employment immersion. And in so many of the other programs we do, it is about immersion. If you want to learn, if you don't know Spanish and you want to learn Spanish, are you going to learn it by 1 or 2 hours a week in a classroom? Or it's much better, go to Oaxaca, spend the summer, immerse yourself and speak it every day, and you will come out learning Spanish.
Mhm.
Same thing in disability. There is a ton to absorb and to rub off. You cannot do it by half measures. So in employment, we got folks together, and the idea was there's no place to hide. In blindness, people will say, how's your job search going? And people might say, well, I'm thinking of applying. Well, maybe I applied for this. Maybe a month or two would go by. And there was no kind of feedback loop, no accountability, no community of support. So we gathered together 12 or 15 people. These would form a group, and they would meet together. And the idea was 72 hours would not exist in a person's life without talking about employment. You
Mm.
would get emails from places that give you ideas of jobs. You would read about stuff. You would go to events, but more than anything else, you'd hang out together, tell your stories. If you had a hard day or a hard week, you would do it with other people looking for it, and you would wrestle with some of the hardest problems in disability and employment, like how do you disclose, how do you deal with people who are weird or don't get your disability, or those crazy questions that people sometimes ask you.
Mhm.
You need that modeling. So for me, setting up this employment immersion program, we didn't tell you what you're going to do for a living. People would come in with, well, I have a bachelor's in sociology, or I did 2 years at a community college in this or that, with an unfocused idea of what you want to do. So, you know, first and foremost, you want to know what blind people are doing now, and what are the areas in which people are being successful. So that kind of career exploration was great. So we formed this program called the Job Site Conversation Series. And we would actually go in a group, 15 or so, to the workplace of a blind person working in all kinds of different areas,
Mhm.
and talk to the person at the job, and often to their supervisor, and just say, like, what are the challenges? This made it real. Now, people without disabilities often have this as a matter of their lives, breathing in and out. They know what other people do. This is the dominant culture. We as people with disabilities don't know. And until you see an entrepreneur, an administrator, a teacher, all these professions that blind people are doing, real estate, sales, HR, IT, all, once you see those things, you cannot get it out of your head. And if you haven't seen them, you don't know that blind people can do anything. So this became a sort of an engine of reality for us as we developed this program. How can we accelerate things so that people don't waste sometimes 10 or 20 years sort of kind of thinking about what they would like to do, sort of kind of wishing they could do it. you know, Blind people participate in the education system at a rate slightly higher than sighted people, have a higher rate of college graduation, read more books, are involved in less crime, all these things. When you run out of the conveyor belt of the education system and you're 22 or 24, it looks like, on paper, it looks like you're pretty equal, competitively equal.
Oh,
But
interesting. Mhm.
then something happens. And then your non-disabled peers start getting work experiences, internships and stuff. And often you don't. And there's another thing too. You can sign up for government benefits. So you can get SSI, or sometimes if you became blind early, or if your parents died, you could get SSDI. And so all of a sudden, here you are 22 and you're getting what looks like a lot of money, $1,000, $2,000 a month for doing nothing. And a lot of people take that bargain. It's a Faustian bargain.
Mm.
It's a, and I don't want to be too judgmental. It's often like a critical safety net between you and extreme poverty. But the cost of that SSI or SSDI is that your peers are going out there and acquiring experience, networks. They know about the workforce. And just a couple of years of not being in the workforce in your 20s makes a big difference in the likelihood that you're going to succeed. And so that's why it's so critical to design employment programs and other programs early in the life process, so that the gap doesn't exist, you know, so that you don't wind up at 39 years old with not much to show on a resume, never doing a job, certainly never supervising. And the people that have the same path as you without a disability are the ones getting the job. So this is what we wanted to avoid at Lighthouse with employment immersion.
Thank you for that, Bryan. And I know you've been doing and continue to do some amazing work at the Lighthouse for the Blind. We've got some questions in the audience. I think folks are eager to ask you stuff. So I'm going to open it up for questions. I think we had one. I think Kakai had a question. No, I don't know if Kakai is still there. Is Kakai still there? No question, Kakai? Hi, we can see you. The interpreter's going to voice. I'm sorry, interpreter, you're on mute. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, is the connection?
Just one moment. He's frozen on my screen.
Okay, is that better? Are you? Oh, I think this. Okay, I think we're good now. Yes. All right. Go ahead. I think it's clear now. Yes.
He's a little fuzzy for me, but go ahead. Okay, he says, I want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much to, I arrived here and I was able to see everything. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for talking about everything with the education. For example, like people that are deafblind or people that are just visually impaired that are hearing, it's even more difficult for deafblind people to have access because they also need an interpreter that does tactile or protactile. So for deaf people, it's even harder to communicate because we also can't see like body language, which is a huge component of ASL. So we do need that advocacy also, in terms of education. A lot of universities or colleges don't kind of provide that advocacy for deafblind students. And also what you mentioned, advocacy for, accessibility in general for deafblind people, but also people that are hearing and blind is just so important to know and to get that exposure, like you were saying. And, today in 2022, it's really time to change and provide that pathway for, generations to come, like you were mentioning, and it's important to be positive and to kind of have that advocacy for Braille. A lot of places, you can get oppressed very easily. So it's just kind of things that I've seen for myself in the community as people with disabilities and people that are deaf as well in those communities, because I'm deaf and people that are deaf blind in general, they don't really feel that they can succeed or kind of advance in those types of settings just because it seems unreachable. And there are people that are in those, disability positions that don't really provide that full accessibility for people that are deafblind specifically. And there's not that much exposure to those groups of minorities, but now it's 2022 and we really just need to have a revolution with that. So people can be open-minded about these certain groups getting into education And then also it's important too at university and high school, elementary school, middle school, in general, it's really important to emphasize education for these different minority groups. And then also in terms of employment, I did see, there are deaf people that have employment opportunities, but deaf blind, I noticed there are a lot of positions for jobs, I think he's saying, but deaf people, especially deaf blind people, kind of just get put on the wayside, and it seems not very possible to get employment. And so I really think it's time to just do something about that. We need to have a change in that, because it's not okay for these groups to just be put on the wayside.
Mhm.
And he's saying, yeah, what you had mentioned about having a role model and providing for those communities. Yeah, he's saying, Bryan, for you, you're so experienced. And I just really have loved being able to see everything that you've been saying. And, I'm hoping too, if you've ever seen anything in terms of like deaf blind people who use protactile and tactile language. Yeah, it's great. I know that I've had these opportunities at APU, but for other places, it would be even more beneficial.
Oh, wow. Kakai, I really appreciate a bunch of things you said. And I can hear from your questioning that you have a lot of pent up advocacy and sort of muscle to change the world. And that word revolution is something very resonant to me as well.
Yes, it's obvious, my body language.
I have to say that in general, what you touch on is this concept that's very important now in disability, which is intersectionality. That so few people are just, everything is plain vanilla and you have one disability. It is often the intersectionality of several disabilities that is going to characterize the world going forward. Minority, intersectionality, poverty, multiple disabilities, and all of that. I've had the good fortune at Lighthouse to have exposure because we have a deafblind program there. We do the FCC telecommunications program for the state of California. And we are hungry for experienced deafblind folks. I mean, we had a access technology training position that we had open for years looking for the right person. We finally hired Nye D'Amato, who moved out from Washington, D.C. to hold that position. So we now have the sort of oomph to actually have mentor to mentor training on this technology. And really, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Not just the community things we do. We do a deafblind session with a lot of protactile at our Enchanted Hills camp every year. There we have, because there's so much to say, we wear out interpreters. There have to be 3 interpreters for every deafblind person because of conversations around the clock. But it is one thing that I will just say politically is that California, it's a state without an SSP program, like a few states have. This is something that my friend Haben Gurma has taught me, that deafblind people need an SSP to communicate and interact with the world in important ways, and not just, I don't know what, to sign up for a procedure at a hospital, but to do the whole spectrum of life, frivolous, entertainment, adventuring, everything. So if you're deafblind in Massachusetts, you have that possibility. If you're a deafblind in California, there is no state program. If you happen to be rich for some crazy reason, you can hire your own. But I think this is political activism that we have to have in California. Just like 100 years ago, blind people got their readers paid for when they went to university. That was 1912. Newell Perry did that. People who are deafblind really need this program, and this is something that I will not stop until we get that through the California legislature.
Thank you, Brian. And can you, and so Haben Gurma, for those of you who don't know, is the first deaf-blind attorney, I believe, and she graduated from Harvard. And so
That's right.
she has been breaking barriers since day one, even just getting into Harvard. So thanks for that, Kakai. Do we have any other questions in the audience? I think we have a few more minutes.
Can I add something, one more
Sure.
thing, if you don't mind? Just one last thing before I go, I wanted to take advantage. So that's a reason why, today in society, many universities and many education facilities and politics, depending on the state, obviously different states have different things like Hawaii, Arizona, etc. What you had just mentioned about the state is very true. It needs to be changed. There are other states, and you do see that they have full recognition of these groups. And it's important, to have that reputation as a state. And what you were just saying, about deafblind people, they always have to fight to get accessibility. They have to fight to be able to be successful. And, the law has to be on our side to prove these certain things. And, we don't want to be looked down on. Deafblind people can do it. They can be successful. And I want more of that. I really just want it to expand and to grow, to be more recognizable. I want it to be respected, more exposure. Really people to be willing, he's saying willing, to work on that, to get advocacy for that, to be in support for the community, for the workforce and for education. Because there are other universities out there that need to be more open-minded. They need to just, know more, saying open-minded, to have these groups involved, et cetera, to have more equitability. So yeah, it would be, have more opportunity, and you have that leadership, to, get more deafblind people into these kind of situations for the future.
Thank you, Kakai. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Do we have any other questions in the audience? Any more questions? No? Okay. So Brian, I have one question for you before we're already up at 11 o'clock. And I want to be respectful of your time, but can you just maybe tell us some of the latest and greatest of what you're doing or what we can expect?
Sure.
Mhm.
Well, at the beginning, you mentioned my work with the United States Ability One Commission.
Mhm.
This is a commission that is one of the earliest disability pieces of legislation. It was passed in 1938 in the Roosevelt administration. And at the time, it was a very progressive thing. It just basically said, you're welcome. If you're a person who's blind and wants to work, you can work with a nonprofit, get a federal contract to supply to the government something. And then there would be these sheltered workshops where people with disabilities would work. In 1938, that was progressive because work, as I said before, 2, 3, 4% employment. So, but now the idea of a sheltered workshop to segregate people with disabilities just sounds like the dark ages. But yet that commission still exists. So why President Biden appointed me to this commission along with the other private citizens is to change it. And what's exciting is we've just published our draft strategic plan on how to take this program, which has $4.5 billion of federal contracts. And instead of having 100 sheltered workshops with people with disabilities segregated, we want to turn that so that federal contractors hire people with disabilities directly, so that people with disabilities are working for Hewlett Packard and Raytheon and 3M Corporation and General Motors, and not in some special ghetto. This is deeply revolutionary. We've just published our strategic plan. Assuming there are no significant objections, I will vote on that for the next 5 years. And now this program will be for competitive, integrated employment going forward 45,000 people with disabilities today are taking advantage of this. When we're finished, 100,000 people will be
Wow.
working in normal federal contractors across the United States. So that's something I'm really proud of as we transmute an old program into something relevant today.
That's incredible. And here at APU, for the first time, we did the workforce recruitment program here. And so we participated in that. We had some students participate, do informational videos, and just begin to get ready, right? Begin to start thinking about employment with the federal government and have the opportunity to talk to somebody so important. You're doing such amazing work, Bryan. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave it open for one last question if there's any more questions. If not, I think we're going to get ready to end the session. Any more questions?
Thank you, Christine.
Oh, Christine? Oh, thanks, Christine.
I just comment. No, it was just a comment. I really appreciate this, Bryan. This was so helpful and very relevant to the work that I'm doing with advocacy with for students of color. And I just see a lot of parallels, and it was just an honor to be in your presence and to hear your expertise. So thank you.
Well, we're all in this together. We're allies, and
Amen.
we've got to change the world.
Yes.
Nothing less than that.
That's right. Thank you, Bryan.
Christine is our Title IX coordinator on campus, so she's a big job. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and taking some time out of your day. Bryan, I can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us, for giving us your time. I appreciate you, and APU appreciates you giving to us in this way and being so generous with your wisdom and your time. So thank you, everybody. I'm gonna call it a session. So everybody have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Thanks, Bryan.
Dr. Varela, thank you. This was great. Call me back anytime I could be of use.
All right, I will. Thanks, everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Varela.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, everyone.
That was a wonderful presentation and interview. So thank you for all you do.
I think it went well. I hope everybody learned a little bit of something, got to hear
Yes,
good stuff happening.
very informative. God bless you.
All right, guys, have a great
Thank you,
weekend.
Bryan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Mika. Thank you. Thanks, Kayla. Have a good one, guys. Bye.
Thank you.